What's up, guys? Welcome to the end of 2024. Wanted to start this off by saying thank you to everyone who helped support this channel through its first year. It's been a ton of fun, and I can't wait to show you guys what I've got in store for next year. As for what's coming up in these last few weeks, I've got a couple more reviews coming out. I need to knock out the end of the year nominations for the Critics Association I'm a part of, and of course I'm working on a top 10 list for my favorite films of the year that'll be coming out at the end of the month. But before we get to that, I wanted to do a quick roundup of roughly a dozen films I saw this year that, for whatever reason, I never got around to making a full review. Also, I apologize in advance if my voice sounds weird. I've been fighting a cold for nearly a month now, and my voice keeps giving out every few minutes or so. Gonna try my best to push through that.
Promise you won't betray him.
I promise.
One of the big award season contenders, and one that will pop up in a lot of best of the year conversations. But overall, it's a film I respected more than I enjoyed. It's a film that attempts to embody the style of its namesake, grand in length and scale and deeply meaningful, yet oftentimes stark and impenetrable at first glance. While on its surface it's merely about one man's desire to create, the subject it tackles includes the American immigration experience, the many forms of addiction, and the conflict between artists and the financiers who support them. And yes, it's not hard to draw a line from the metaphor the film displays to the process of filmmaking itself. And the decision to use an old style of film known as VistaVision brings a lush texture to every scene. Guy Pearce's performance, Brady Corbett's direction, and the score are getting the most attention right now, and rightfully so. Still, it's a film you often feel you have to endure rather than enjoy. So if you're not up for it, I certainly won't blame you.
Do you remember me now?
I honestly thought this one was just hurt by its trailer. People thought they were going to get Dev Patel's take on John Wick, when in reality it's a searing takedown of the modern political scene in India, with a handful of solid fight sequences sprinkled throughout. It had a mixed reception, but I hope Patel gets more chances at action roles like this in the future. Steve McQueen's latest, seen as a bit of a letdown given who was involved. I get why he went the route of having this almost Dickensian story of a young boy trying to reunite with his mother be the link between all these different vignettes as Londoners try to survive the Blitz, and it almost works, but a few of those segments felt like a waste of time, especially since the movie has next to nothing for Saoirse Ronan to do. By the way, this was kind of a disappointing year for her. Between this and The Outrun, a lot of critics were expecting her to be somewhere in the awards conversation, but neither really seemed to catch on. For as great as she is, I feel like she's been stuck doing the same introspective roles for a decade now, and I'd kill to see her go the route of somebody like Jodie Comer or Anya Taylor-Joy and just take risks on a variety of roles with different directors. There was a lot of hype and discussion about this one in the first half of the year. I love the score, I thought the camera tricks used for the different tennis scenes were fun, but I just couldn't connect to the story the way so many other people did. I'm fine with a story about terrible people being awful to each other, but on some level you need at least one character to connect with, and with the three leads, I never could. And that ending is meant to be seen as this big moment of triumph, but the more I thought about it, the less it landed with me. This one worked for a lot of folks. I just ain't one of them. This one is powerful stuff. I went in basically knowing nothing, but once it was over, I spent an hour learning about the real-life juvenile detention center it's based on. The decision to have the bulk of the film be presented from the first-person perspective of two different characters gives the prison a visceral, in-your-face, inescapable sensation. But it's not exploitative by any means, opting to merely imply the worst of what's going on and force the audience to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. And after lulling you into a false sense of security that the camera work is just a filmmaking gimmick, it pulls off one final reveal that makes for one of the biggest emotional gut punches of the year. The praise this one has been getting from year-end awards is well deserved. Go out of your way to find this one. This was the latest directing outing from Jesse Eisenberg, and once you've seen the cast list, you already kind of know the dynamic of this road trip film. Kieran Culkin is a free spirit full of snark and emotion, while Eisenberg is uptight and neurotic, and both deliver exactly as you'd expect. It touches on a lot of ideas: generational trauma, awkward family relationships, the strange dissonance of going on tours to places that are simultaneously frozen in time but are full of people openly looking to move on. But it also drags at times, and goes in the exact direction you'd expect once you meet Culkin's character. That being said, its strongest note is its ending. While plenty of films will present a story where a troubled figure undergoes some sort of life-changing transformation after a long journey, this film shows the harsh reality in how that's not always the case. Culkin's ongoing award season hype is deserved, but beyond his performance, it's just okay.
My name is not Vince. My name is Mr. McMahon.
Not a movie, but it is one of the few big documentary series from this year I actually watched all the way through. The consensus surrounding the series when it dropped was that it helped non-wrestling fans get caught up to speed on Vince McMahon's decades of bizarre and allegedly criminal behavior, while longtime wrestling fans were merely given a refresh on plenty of stories they already knew. Yet despite falling into that latter category, I was actually impressed with the finished product. The fact that it even saw the light of day is impressive, but think about what the production team had to deal with on this. It has a central figure who openly brags about not wanting to give away what he really thinks about his own life story, who then gets hit with lawsuits and abandons the interviews before the filming is actually over. So the solution was to pair Vince's statements with other interviews and let the audience decide which side is lying, and usually it was Vince, then played the ongoing lawsuit and accusations completely straight. It was the best they could do given the circumstances and educated a lot of people on what the wrestling world has known for decades. I call that a win.
If they shoot someone on live television, whose story is that? Is it ours or is it theirs?
Here we have a film about the hostage crisis at the 1972 Munich Olympics, the subject of plenty of movies, documentaries, and books over the years. This time it centers around ABC Sports' live coverage of the attack, specifically the technological hurdles the team had to overcome, the political infighting with ABC's news team, and the split-second ethical decisions that had to be made while innocent lives were at risk. It's a pretty straightforward procedural taking place almost entirely in an old-school TV studio, and as a former journalist, movies like this are catnip for me. I loved its usage of real footage from the original broadcast, and popped whenever reporting legends like Howard Cosell or Peter Jennings showed up. Peter Skarsgård gets top billing, but it's John Magaro and Leonie Benesch who do the heavy lifting. Heavily recommended, especially if you're a journalist or a history buff.
In my journey to find out who is Mavis Beacon, I learned who she wasn't.
This one caught my attention because, like so many kids my age, my school had us play the Mavis Beacon games to learn how to type, and didn't realize she was a made-up figure. The documentary centers around two young women trying to meet the person who originally depicted Mavis, but the film is about much more than just determining one woman's identity. It dives into a bunch of different ideas, like what Mavis meant to an entire generation in terms of representation, the racism and lack of representation in the growing AI markets, what does it mean when a version of your life story takes on a life of its own in online spaces where you have no control, and ultimately ends on the filmmakers deciding to give that control back to the original Mavis by respecting her wishes to not be pursued for an on-camera interview. It's admittedly self-indulgent at times with its presentation, and I'm not usually a fan of documentaries where the story of the film's creation overtakes the focus of the film, but if you grew up with Mavis Beacon or were around for the early days of the internet, you'll have a good time with this one.
Let's just all start being honest with ourselves, old friends.
One of Sebastian Stan's two big swings this year in terms of acting. Based on the trailer, you might think it's some sort of Twilight Zone-esque story where somehow Stan's character created Adam Pearson, but it's a much more personal story about a man who closed himself off to the world because of a physical condition, and just because he found a way to cure his condition, his personality remained unchanged, and therefore someone who appreciated his life was able to live it to its fullest while he let it slip by. That being said, I didn't love it. It's by no means a pleasant watch, and some of the ideas on internal self-loathing represented through body horror were better done elsewhere. But it's a film I kept thinking about days later, so points for that.
You know what to do.
So cards on the table, I've avoided most of Clint Eastwood's directing work ever since American Sniper. Partially because it feels like he's just screwing with us at times, but also because it feels like portions of the film community are playing with kid gloves when it comes to talking about his films. This one deals with some of his favorite themes: justice, morality, and whether or not those things matter in the face of a flawed system. But for as much hype as it got with its incredibly limited theatrical release, I had honestly forgotten about the movie the morning after I watched it. It's easy to find now, but you can honestly skip it. At first glance, it's a small international film on a shoestring budget with a few pacing issues. But in reality, this movie has one of the wildest production stories of any film this year. The movie was filmed in secret in Iran in just over 2 months. Its director had to flee the country to avoid being arrested yet again by the Iranian government, and the footage had to be smuggled into Germany so it could be edited in time for its worldwide premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. Director Mohammad Rasulov is unrelenting in his political commentary with this one, tackling corruption within the country's Islamic Revolutionary Court, the constricting nature of its theocratic regime, especially towards women, and the Masha Amini protest regarding the country's mandatory hijab laws, all stitched into a narrative of a family slowly tearing itself apart. It's not my favorite international release of the year, but it's definitely up there. In a year where Pixar made the highest-grossing film of the year, and DreamWorks created what might be its magnum opus, the best animated film of the year might just be a wordless Latvian film about a little black cat trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world. The best thing you can do for this one is to walk in knowing as little as possible, but just know it's simply fantastic. Also, Binks gave it 2 paws way up. So what are some of your favorite films of the year? Did you see any of the ones I just mentioned, and what did you think of those? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Stay tuned for the next review, and thanks for watching.